What if I told you that the single most dangerous thing you could ever become is not a warrior, not a fighter, but someone who can think clearly and speak truthfully? What if the key to transforming your life isn't found in some exotic destination or expensive course, but in the simple, brutal act of asking your cell phone honest question each night before you sleep? You're about to discover why the most successful people you know share one common trait that has nothing to do with luck, connections, or even talent. You're about to learn why your words are the most powerful weapons you possess, and why most people go through their entire lives never truly living as themselves. This isn't just another self-help message. This is about the fundamental choice that will determine whether you live a life of meaning or drift through decades of comfortable mediocrity. And the clock is ticking. Let me start with something that might sting a little, but bear with me. Right now, as you listen to this, there are things you're doing that you know are wrong. You know they're wrong, but you keep doing them anyway. There are conversations you're having where you say things you don't believe just to get what you think you want from other people. There are moments when you catch yourself being someone you don't really respect. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Every time you speak words that aren't truly yours, you're not living your own life. You're living the life of whatever spirit has possessed you in that moment. Maybe it's the spirit of manipulation. Maybe it's the spirit of people-pleasing. Maybe it's the spirit of fear. But it's not you. And if you spend your whole life crafting your words like a student who writes only what the professor wants to hear to get the grade, then even if you get the grade, it's not really you who got it. It's the false version of yourself, the manipulative version. And at the end of that kind of life, you'll look back and realize you never actually lived at all. But here's where it gets interesting. There's another way to live, and it starts with a simple but terrifying question. Sit on your bed one night. I mean, really sit there, not scrolling through your phone, not distracted by anything. Just sit there and mean this with every fiber of your being. Tell yourself, my life is not everything I want it to be. Maybe it's not even everything I need it to be. The suffering that comes with this reality is making me bitter, cynical, resentful. It's driving me to see evil everywhere except in my own heart. These are real problems. And then you ask yourself, what's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix? Meditate on that question. And here's the thing, you'll get an answer. It won't be the answer you want, but it'll be the necessary one. And it'll often point you to something small, something that seems almost trivial. But here's the secret: when you start making those micro improvements, real micro improvements, to things you know are wrong, you'll improve unbelievably rapidly. The great people I know, the ones living truly adventurous lives, they're brutally truthful to themselves and other people. And that honesty becomes their adventure. Because here's what happens when you decide to tell the truth. You have to ask yourself, if you're not speaking the truth, who is it that's talking? If you're saying something you don't believe to be true, it's not you talking. It's something else. It might be the part of you that wants to manipulate the other person into delivering what you think you want from them. But what is that spirit of manipulation that you've allowed to possess you? It's not you. And if you live your whole life in that instrumental manner, crafting your words like tools to get what you want, you don't actually have your life. You have the life of the spirit of manipulation. Now, let me tell you something that will change how you think about learning forever. You only have to ask a stupid question once. When you ask that question, and you're in a crowd, 80% of the people in that crowd have the same question. They're just too cowardly to ask it. But you ask, someone tells you the answer, and you never have to ask that question again. You're no longer stupid about that thing. This principle extends to everything you can learn from others. When you read, you can learn without having to go through the school of hard knocks. You don't have to get punched in the face repeatedly by situations that other people have already gone through and written about. I remember reading about a military officer who would read a book called About Face before bed each night during deployment. Just 2 or 3 pages. There were so many lessons in that book that correlated to what he was actually going through. The level of capability he gained from seeing something just one time was immense. If you see something once, you're infinitely better than if you'd never seen it before. It's like those little puzzles, those mind benders. They only work on you once. The riddle only works once. Then you know the answer. You never get fooled by that again. So when you read enough, you're capturing all these lessons. You're essentially choosing your peers from across history. You can set up great minds on your shelf. You can enter into their world and benefit from everything they've thought. You can saturate yourself with the wisdom of people whose minds are more powerful and more well-developed than your own. It's disruptive, but unbelievably useful. Think about this: when you read a substantial work, you're getting the distilled essence of someone's entire life's work. I once read a book called The Neuropsychology of Anxiety that had 800 references. The author had actually read and understood all those references. It took me 6 months to read that book, but I got an entire education out of it. In 6 months, I experienced what it took him 30 years to learn. What a gift that is. But here's where most people make a crucial mistake in their reading. They think if they're going to read something like Shakespeare, they should just be able to pick it up and understand it immediately. That's not how it works. Shakespeare is barely written in English. It's almost another language. So what do you have to do? You have to start interpreting it. You have to pull those words apart and parse them to see all the depth that each individual word contains. The weight of those words, they're so pregnant with meaning that you have to extract every layer. And here's what's remarkable about developing this skill. When you go back into the real world, someone hands you a document written by some lawyer, and you pull it apart the same way. You ask, wait, what does this word actually mean? Let me see what this particular definition is and how that changes my understanding of this document. This is unbelievably useful because virtually every word is like an ancient artifact. A word is like an animal in some sense. It has an evolutionary history, it transforms across time, and each word carries the ekosoph it's passed with it. Each word attracts other words in a particular unique way, so it lives in a word ecosystem that contains information about the history of that word. Why is this important? Because you think in words, you talk in words, you have all these archaic entities, these living words that you use to construct your thoughts and communicate your ideas. The more you know about them, the more you know about yourself, the more you know about other people, and the better you are at formulating and communicating your ideas. There's nothing lost in this kind of investigation. There's nothing but gain. Your ambition, if you have any sense, should be to become competent and dangerous. Do you want to be competent and dangerous, or do you want to be vague and useless? It is definitely the case that there is no more exceptional form of the capacity to be dangerous than to be articulate. So it's a moral endeavor in a real sense to become articulate, to become the master of your own tongue. Now, every advantage comes with a disadvantage. If you're extroverted, you're social and positive, but you're also impulsive and can tilt toward hedonism. You can't stand being alone. No matter where you land in the temperamental landscape, you're going to have your associated faults and temptations. This is why it's useful to order your room. A chaotic room makes you anxious, because there are too many pathways, too many possibilities. People don't really repress the things they don't want to face, they just fail to unpack them. You want a horizon of ever-expanding possibility. We're built to walk uphill, and when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance. This brings us to something crucial: beware of unintended consequences. You might think, this thing will just do what I want it to do and nothing else. But it turns out that not only is what we want from each other the real thing, but that's also the adventure of your life. If you aren't truthful, and this means, unfortunately, especially at the beginning when you start to be truthful, it means deeply coming to terms with your inadequacies and humility. It's very painful. But without that, you don't have the adventure of your life. You have the role that you've acquiesced to, and that will take all the meaning out of your life. It's good for you to go take your place in the world. Have some ambition, have a vision, have a goal, have a strategy. Try to be a good person, not because it's your duty, but precisely because that's the proper way to live. You grow in proportion to the weight you take on voluntarily. And it's also true that we have no idea what the upper limit to that is. It's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. Almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, is experienced in relationship to a goal. So in some sense, you want a goal that you can never attain so you can always move closer to it as it recedes. You might think that sounds frustrating, like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill, but it's not. Because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. That's why the highest levels of virtue and goals are, in some sense, transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. The problem with the vision of Mai Tais on the beach is that, first of all, it's a vision of drug-induced unconsciousness. Second, it's only going to work for about a week. Third, you're going to be a laughingstock in a month and depressed and aimless and goalless. What you want is a horizon of ever-expanding possibility. And so what happens to people is they stake at their soul on the attainment of an instrumental goal. It can be a pretty high-order goal, but then you gather and think, now what? The answer can't be, well, I'm going to live in the lap of luxury and never have to lift a finger. What do you want to be? A giant infant with a gold bottle, never having to do anything but lay on your back and suck. You can see the problem with that as a conceptualization. No, you want to be like an active warrior moving uphill with your sword in hand. That's dynamic. That's exciting. People are afraid of the truth because often if you reveal it, it causes conflict in the moment. But telling the truth is definitely an adventure. Another way of going about it is just to say what you think and see what happens. That's an adventure because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. There's this old idea that it's necessary to have faith in the truth. Here's a way of thinking about that. Someone asks you a question, and you might think, here's the outcome I want, so here's how I'm going to answer that question. But another way of approaching it is, you ask me a question, I'm going to think about the answer, and I'm just going to tell you what I think. It doesn't matter what the outcome is because I'm willing to see what the outcome will be, predicated on the idea that there isn't a better outcome than the one that truth produces, even if it's harsh and terrible in the short term. And sometimes it is harsh and terrible, but there isn't a better way of doing it. Now, you might say, how do you know that? And the answer is, I don't know that. That's why it's an article of faith, because I believe deeply that the being you produce as a consequence of telling the truth is good by definition, even though it's harsh and often uncomfortable, because you get in trouble. One of the things I've really learned to articulate better recently is that there's a very tight relationship between aspiration and responsibility. The first question might be, do you need to aspire to something? And the answer is yes, because you have to do something. You can't just sit there. If you just sit there, you'll die. You can't just sit there. You have to go act out something. Okay, so act toward what? Well, that's whatever your aspiration is. You have to have an aim. What should the aim be? Well, it should be something worthwhile. Why do something that you don't feel is worth doing? What do you think is worth doing? Well, if you watch other people and you judge when they're doing something worthwhile, you usually judge them positively if you see that they're taking responsibility, at least for themselves. But maybe you could get your act together so you're taking care of yourself and your family. And maybe you could even do better than that and take care of yourself and your family and your community. Good for you. That's responsibility, and that's an aim. Here's one of the things that's interesting about that: your life doesn't have meaning without aspiration or an aim. You need a hierarchy of values. There's got to be something at the top. It's got to be something important. If you don't have that, your life doesn't have any meaning. So if you criticize the hierarchy or even the idea of hierarchy, you destroy the idea of aspiration, and then people have nothing. That's not helpful. People are built for a struggle, and they're built for weight. You want to take on a heavy burden voluntarily. See if you can put yourself together. See what you can do out in the world while you're waiting to die. It's an all-in game. It better be worthwhile. If you gaze into the abyss long enough, you see the light, not the darkness. I'm betting my life on it. Bring in the adventure along the road. And where's that adventure to be found? You don't want someone else's fate. Your fate is enough, and your adventure is enough. It's plenty. It's more than you can ever fully realize. And so that's also part of the reason that we all believe that the individual has some intrinsic dignity. Don't be so sure that your position in your room is so damn trivial. It might be your attitude toward it that's trivial. And if you're in dire straits and dire circumstances, just look at how much opportunity you have to make things better. Maybe the same thing's true of life. You bind yourself to it, and the tighter you bind yourself to it, the more you find out what it is. And that's like a radical embrace. We're built to walk uphill, and when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. Almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, ice experienced in relationship to a goal. So in some sense, you want a goal that you can never attain. There's nothing that makes you more formidable than verbal competence than being able to articulate, to think, to marshal your arguments. Aim yourself in one direction. And you might say, well, I've gone halfway down this path and I found out it's wrong. How do you distinguish that from just giving up? That's a really hard question. It's a moral hazard. But here's the absolute truth. You have to play one of them. You have to learn to play one of them. You have to become an expert at least one of them. And then that's not a relative proposition. So you want to commit to something. And when you commit to something, you require yourself to bring all of your disparate components moving in a single direction, united in a single direction. So it's a unifying act. Now, you might ask, how should people become more dangerous? Becoming more articulate is definitely the primary array of weapons. Physical prowess is something, and the physical confidence that comes along with that is not nothing either. But the same thing replicated at the level of the ability to communicate and to think, that's a way broader field of battle and opportunity. In a world with seemingly infinite options, it can be challenging to decide on the best course of action for one's life. A useful approach is to focus on what bothers you or what you find most challenging. These discomforts or challenges can be an indication of where you should focus your time and energy. By leaning into what is difficult or uncomfortable, individuals can discover their strengths and find direction in their lives. Be honest with yourself about your interests, abilities, and limitations, and pursue the path that aligns most closely with your values and passions. There are a lot of things you could be bothered by, like a million things. But some things grip you, they bug you, and they might make you resentful and bitter because they bug you so much. They're your things. They've got you. So then I look for a question that I would like the answer to. I would really like the answer to it. So I don't assume I already have the answer because I would actually really like to have the answer. So if I could gate a better answer, great. And that's the first thing. And that's like a prayer. It's like, okay, here's a mystery you would like to delve into further. Well, so that's humility. It's like, here's a mystery, which means I don't know. I would like to delve into it further, which means I don't know enough already. And then comes the revelation. What's a revelation? Well, if you ask yourself a question, it's a real question. Do you get an answer or not? The answer is, well, yeah, thoughts start to appear in your head. So from somewhere. From where? Do you have a sense? It depends on what you're aiming at. It depends on your intent. Imagine that your intent is to make things better. Then maybe they come from the place that's designed to make things better. Maybe your intent is to make things worse. Then they come from hell. Let's say you want to become who you could be in the fullest sense. Let's say you're someone who's going to solve some serious problems. The first thing you have to do is admit to the seriousness of that problems. That's no joke. And so the first thing is just the terror of the problem itself, and that's enough to paralyze you. That's the Hydra. That's the Gorgon with the head of snakes. It'll paralyze you and turn you to stone. That's the basilisk in the Harry Potter series. You look at it, and it turns you to stone, and it lurks underneath everything. It's malevolence and tragedy. And so there's that. And then the next is, well, you're going to take responsibility for that. You're really going to do that. That's a hell of a load. And so it's daunting to even consider that. And then there's the discipline and responsibility that necessitates, which is also daunting. It's like, oh my God, the problem's that serious. I'm really going to have to get my act together in order to not contribute to it, much less solve it. And so the problem is terrible, and then the solution is daunting. But the upside of that is there isn't anything better to have than a problem that's worth solving, like that's really worth solving. And so the more of that you take on, the more you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, no matter what. I think I'm getting up, I'm trudging forward. Doesn't matter what I'm suffering from. I've got things that need to be done. They're necessary. And that gives you that sensitive purpose that is the antidote to bitterness. So let's say you want your life to be meaningful. Okay, then what you do matters. It actually matters. So that's an interesting thing. Let's say you go over your past with a fine-tooth comb and you decide you're going to take responsibility for everything that you did that was wrong and everything that you failed to do that you could have done that was right. Does that change the world? Depends on how thoroughly you do it. You might say it changes the world like nothing else possibly can. And I think that's actually right. You have to allow yourself a certain latitude for error. That's a useful thing to know too. One of the things I tell people when they're trying to develop a vision for their life or an implementable plan is make a bad plan. Make the best one you can, but don't get obsessive about it. Make a plan, implement it. You'll figure out when you implement it why it's stupid exactly, and then you can fix it a little bit. Compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. The same basic ideas that you have to get your markers for success right, because otherwise you can end up in the situation where there's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison because you shouldn't just compare. Well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you. And God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. You just don't know any of that, but you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself, and that's a lot better. It is the only way. Well, it's also the only way of really measuring anything approximating proper improvement. You can actually tell when you're a little better than you were yesterday, and you can actually do that. That's another thing that's so interesting about it. You can actually make yourself a little better in some way pretty much every day. It's funny, obviously, if you have a problem and you think about it, you can think of a solution, and it's not obvious how you do that. It's not like you know how you're manipulating your neurons or something. It happens of its own accord in some sense. You can participate in it, I guess, and you can interfere with it, and it seems to take a certain amount of willpower, but it still all happens mysteriously behind the scenes. One of the things I've been thinking about is that there are lots of different ways to interpret the world, and you can maybe even make a case that there's an endless number of ways to interpret the world. The problem with that is that it kind of disorients you in terms of what you should be doing. But just because there's a very large number of ways to interpret the world doesn't mean there's a very large number of productive, meaningful, and sustainable ways to interpret the world. And one of the things you do have to do is figure out how you conduct yourself today so that you don't upset the apple cart in a week or a month or a year. And so what you do, in some sense psychologically, is you admit to yourself that your current frame of reference is faulty, and then you start opening the door to a different kind of thinking, which is more creative thinking. It's more lateral thinking, saying, well, I'm wrong, but that's not necessarily a problem because I could be right if I thought some other way. And that's great. Often it works. There's almost no end to the utility of trying to figure out which ways you're wrong, because there's lots of them. And every time you discover one, then you don't have to be quite so wrong anymore. That's a really good deal. What's your time worth? If you're a university student, well, it's certainly worth minimum wage because obviously. But it's worth way more than that, because if you spend a productive hour when you're 20, then you gain the benefits of that hour for the rest of your life. So there's the compounding effect of time spent when you're young. So let's assume your time's worth $50 an hour, which I think is an underestimate, but let's call it 50. That's $2,000 a week you're wasting. It's $100,000 a year. How much better would your life be if you weren't wasting $100,000 a year? The Da Vinci Code, everyone like that. It sold a lot, and it was full of little mysteries and full of hints that there was more to the world than you think, which is definitely true. And that there was a way of getting access to that knowledge and that it would really be worthwhile. People like that. They like it idea. And the reason for that is because it's actually true. Learn to write. I'm dead serious about that because writing is formalized thinking. So the way you write is, first of all, you need a problem, because why write if you don't have a problem? This is good advice if you're just writing an essay for your classes. Pick a bloody problem that you want to write about, because otherwise it's false right from the start. It's up to you to engage with the material until you find something that grips you that you desire to investigate. So you need a problem. Well, the next thing you need to do is you need to have something to say about the problem. Reading is really good for that. Read as much as you can get your hands on that addresses the problem. Okay, so now you know a bunch of things, or at least provisionally know them. You at least have access to them. Well, now you start sorting through it. Maybe I need to summarize what I've learned and then a need to iron out the contradictions between what I've learned, and I need to elegantly formulate that. And I need to get my word choice right, and my phrase choice right, and my sentence choice right. And I need to organize the sentences into proper paragraphs and the paragraphs into proper sequence so that I have a coherent argument. And at the same time, what you're doing is you're integrating your own personality at the highest and most abstract level of organization. You're sharpening your tools and you're putting yourself straight because you're learning to think. You learn to do that by writing. Over many years, you hone your words. They're the most powerful thing about you, none. If you're an effective writer and speaker and communicator, you have all the authority and confidence that there is. So you're at university. Maybe you're taking a humanities degree. What's the humanities degree for? It's to teach you how to think. You learn to think by writing. Now there's more, learning to read, to speak, and all of that. But the best thing you can do is read and write every day, a couple of hours every day. Write about things you find important and see if you can discover what you believe to be true. And that'll build you a foundation. It's unbelievably practical. If you look at people who are phenomenally successful across life, there are various reasons, but one of them is that they're unbelievably good at articulating what they're aiming at, and strategizing and negotiating and enticing people with a vision forward. Get your words together. That makes you unstoppable. And that's where the core of the humanities, that idea. Get your words together. Make yourself an articulate creature. And then you're deadly in the best possible way. The best thing you can do is teach people to write, because there's no difference between that and thinking. And one of the things that just blows me away about universities is that no one ever tells students why they should write something. It's like, well, you have to do this assignment. Well, why are you writing? Well, you need the grade? No, you need to learn to think, because thinking makes you act effectively in the world. Thinking makes you win the battles you undertake, and those could be battles for good things. If you can think and speak and write, you are absolutely deadly. Nothing can get in your way. And I can't believe that people aren't just told that. It's the most powerful weapon you can possibly provide someone with. And I mean, I know lots of people who've been staggeringly successful, and I've watched them throughout my life. Those people, you don't want to have an argument with them. They'll just slash you into pieces, and not in a malevolent way. It's like if you're going to make your point and they're going to make their point, you better have your points organized, because otherwise you are going to look like and be an absolute idiot. You are not going to get anywhere. The truth of the matter is that you have a lot of potential as a child, but none of that is capable of manifesting itself as freedom before you become disciplined. And discipline is a matter of the imposition of order, and the order is necessary, especially for people who are hopeless and nihilistic. And what does it mean? Well, it doesn't mean, geez, I hate getting up at 800 in the morning to get ready for work. That just means that you're not very disciplined. Or maybe that might mean something deeper, but I'd start with lack of discipline before rearranging your whole life. Because you might say, well, I hate getting up at 800 in the morning no matter what I'm doing. And then it's not your job. I don't mean don't do difficult things. I mean, watch yourself. And if you see that you're doing things that make you hate yourself, then consider the cost of continuing. If something's valuable, you'll make sacrifices to attain it. That discovery of sacrifice, I think that's what separates human beings from animals, because we discovered that we could let go of something we value in the present, and we would gain something we value even more in the future. Lay a disciplinary structure on yourself, get the chaos in check, and then you can move toward a state that's freer, because it's discipline first. Look, if you're going to become a concert pianist, there's going to be several thousand hours of extraordinarily disciplined practice. That's the imposition of order on your potential. But what comes out of that is a much grander freedom. So virtually every freedom that you have in life that's true freedom is purchased at the price of discipline. But it's not some casual self-help doctrine. It's that if you don't organize yourself properly, you'll pay for it, and in a big way. And so will the people around you. And I would say start where you can start. If something announces itself to you as in need of repair that you could repair, then fix it. You fix 100 things like that, your life will be a lot different. Now, I often tell people to fix the things you repeat every day, because people tend to think of those as trivial. You get up, you brush your teeth, you have your breakfast, you have your routines that you got through every day. Well, those probably constitute 50% of your life, And people think, well, they're mundane and I don't need to pay attention to them. No, that's exactly wrong. The things you do every day, those are the most important things you do. Hands down, there isn't anything better to have than a problem that's worth solving, like that's really worth solving. And so the more of that you take on, the more you have a reason to get out of bed in the morning, no matter what. I'm getting up, I'm trudging forward. Doesn't matter what I'm suffering from. I've got things that need to be done. They're necessary. And that gives you that sense of purpose. That is the antidote to bitterness. So there's lots of reasons. I thought for a long time, imagine you have a choice in front of you, because you do. So here's the choice. Your life is either meaningful or meaningless. Let's go through the meaningless part first, because you think, well, of course I don't want it to be meaningless. Yeah. Just hold on a second. Nothing you do matters, and so impulsive pleasure is theater of the day. No responsibility. You can do whatever you want. It's like Pleasure Island in Pinocchio, or it's like Neverland in Peter Pan. You're still a kid. You can play all the time. Impulsive pleasure and no response, that's the reward for meaninglessness. But then the other side is, okay, well, let's say you want your life to be meaningful. Then what you do matters. It actually matters. Make a mistake. Hurts you, hurts your family, hurts the world in a deeper way than you think. And you have to be awake to that, and then you have to take it on yourself. If you're at a particular stage right now, and that stage would involve a particular worldview and the behaviors that go along with that, so the perceptions and behaviors, but it's not enough because you haven't mastered the whole world and you're making mistakes all the time, then there are other neurological mechanisms that maybe that's a more left hemisphere phenomenon, the instantiation off that identity. Then there are right hemisphere mechanisms that are tracking your errors and keeping track of them. Errors are an indication that your theory is incomplete. So the errors accumulate, and the information around the errors accumulates, and another identity starts to become formulated. And it solves all the problems your previous identity did, but also some additional ones. When you have an or how moment like that, it's the manifestation of that next identity making itself known. Because it's being built from the bottom up, it isn't explicit yet. Then you'll encounter an explicit statement, and they map onto that, and that's the aha. It's like, oh yes, that's what ties together these see things that I've been wrestling with in the back of my mind. Someone made it explicit, and that's one of the great things about language that can also help fill in the gaps too, because then you can start to make arguments based on that observation. What is the consequence, the long-term consequence of acting? So many people, especially because off the world I live in, Instagram and social media, we kind of build out these personas, and then we mostly follow the implicit instructions that come with those personas. Well, that's the problem right there. I think Pinocchio is a brilliant work of art. If you're a puppet and an actor, and Pinocchio is both at times in that movie, both a puppet and an actor. So why an actor? Why is there something wrong with being an actor? Well, the first question is who sets your role? And then the second question is who's pulling your strings? So you've put on this front that is there to make you popular and sexy and desirable and to mask from yourself your own inadequacies. But that's a role. Well, who wrote it and for what purpose? Maybe you're acting out a tragedy. Maybe you're acting out narcissism. You don't know because you've put that on yourself in an attempt, in some ways, to deliver to people what they want, or more accurately, to look as though you're delivering to people what they want. And it's not nothing to do that, because at least you're attempting, in some sense, to adapt to the social world. Someone who's really infantile and dependent, someone who's never left home, part of their problem is that they haven't crafted a persona. So you don't want to denigrate it entirely, but it's no substitute for the real thing. And it turns out that not only is what we want from each other the real thing, but that's also the adventure of your life. And so if you aren't truthful, and that means, unfortunately, especially at the beginning when you start to be truthful, it means deeply coming to terms with your inadequacies in humility. So it's very painful. Without that, you don't have the adventure of your life. You have the role that you've acquiesced to, and that'll take all the meaning out of your life. Imagine that the world was constituted so that the true adventure of your life emerged as a consequence of truth in speech and action, because that would be reflective of the real you. So it would be you living. And then imagine that the adventure that would occur if you dwelled in the truth would be so overwhelming that it would justify all the suffering. I've really contended with this idea of struggle and chaos in my life and the role it plays. Once upon a time, I thought I was trying to rid my life of chaos and struggle. I thought that's why I was trying to get rich and get the Ferrari and the blonde. I thought that would create a life free of struggle. But then I looked at some studies and heard about this thing called gold medal depression when Olympians come back from the Olympics and they've lost orientation. And I tried to understand the role that struggle would have to play for me to be a fulfilled human being for the rest of my life. We're built to walk uphill, and when you reach the pinnacle of the hill, you want to stop and appreciate the vision. But the next thing you want is a higher hill in the distance, because it's from the uphill climb that we derive our value. And I mean this technically. Almost all the positive emotion we feel, especially the emotion that fills us with enthusiasm, is experienced in relationship to a goal. So in some sense, you want a goal that you can never attain, so you can always move closer to the goal that recedes as you move toward it. You think, well, that's frustrating. It's like Sisyphus pushing the rock uphill. But it's not, because as you pursue that goal, you put yourself together and your life does get better and richer and more abundant. That's why the highest levels of virtue and goal are, in some sense, transcendent. You want them to be above everything you're doing so you can continually move towards something that's more sublime and better. That's what you are. You're here to live, not to sleep. As we near the end of our journey together, I want you to think about something. Right now, tonight, when you go to bed, you have a choice. You can continue living the life you've been living, the comfortable, familiar life where you avoid the hard questions, where you say what people want to hear, where you drift through your days without really confronting who you could become. Or you can sit on the edge of your bed and ask yourself that one crucial question. What's one thing I'm doing wrong that I know I'm doing wrong, that I could fix, that I would fix? And when you get that answer, and you will get an answer, you can choose to act on it. You can choose to make that first small change that will set in motion a cascade of improvements that will transform your life in ways you can't even imagine right now. Remember, you grow in proportion to the weight you take on voluntarily. The problems that seem overwhelming today are actually opportunities to discover what you're truly capable of. Every time you choose truth over comfort, every time you choose responsibility over blame, every time you choose to improve yourself rather than criticize the world, you're not just changing your own life, you're changing the world itself. The great adventure of your life is waiting. It's not in some distant place or future achievement. It's right here, right now, in your willingness to become who you could be if you stopped making excuses and started making changes. Your words are your most powerful weapons. Your thoughts, when properly organized and articulated, can move mountains. Your commitment to truth, no matter how painful, is your path to freedom. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the perfect moment. Don't wait for someone else to show you the way. You have everything you need right now to begin the most important work of your life, the work of becoming yourself. The clock is ticking. Every day you delay is a day you could have been living instead of just existing. Every moment you spend in comfortable lies is a moment stolen from the adventure that is rightfully yours. So here's my challenge to you. Start tonight. Ask the question. Get the answer. Take the first step. And then tomorrow, take another one. And keep walking uphill, because that's what you were built to do. Your life is not a dress rehearsal. This is it. This is your one shot at becoming everything you could be. Don't waste it. If this message has resonated with you, if something inside you has stirred awake, then share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about the one thing you're going to change starting tonight. Subscribe to continue this journey of transformation, because this is just the beginning. The adventure of your life is calling. Are you ready to answer? The choice is yours. Choose wisely. Choose courageously. Choose now. Because in the end, you'll be judged not by the comfort you maintained, but by the weight you carried, the truth you spoke, and the person you became despite every obstacle in your path. Your time is now. Your life is waiting. Step into it.